Hey, thanks again, Chris, for making the time for this interview. It's really great to be able to be connected and get your time as well. I know you're a busy man. You've done a lot of different things across the tech ecosystem, both in New Zealand and in the US, and looking forward to exploring that a little bit more in today's interview.
Awesome.
Basically, how it's going to run today is I'm going to run through a series of questions, but before we did that, I thought it'd be great to just get an overview and background sort of your journey. I know that just to summarize, you've launched Pushpay to great success with $1 billion exit. There's Leadr as well, which helps high performance teams be coached online via like the software that you offer. And then you've got Home app as well, which is more in the B2C space, offering content in the, I guess you'd call it like the religious. How do you
the faith space? Absolutely,
the faith space. Yeah, that's it. Cool. So yeah, if you wanted to kick off by just giving me a background, feel free to take as little or as long as you like.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I trained to be an accountant. That was my background to business, and through that journey, tried about 18 different ideas to create a startup, and failed at all of them. And number 19 just happened to be Pushpay. And so I met with Elliot and spent a couple of years really trying to figure out what exactly Pushpay was going to be, until we kind of came across the idea of how do we make giving in a church service as easy as buying a song on iTunes. And we brought that to the States only after 12 months. We didn't do the typical go to Australia and then to America. For a lot of reasons, we came straight to America. And, again, spent a year just trying to get our feet kind of wet in the US market. And then from 2014 to 2019, went from a million, give or take, of revenue to over 100 million of revenue in about 5 years. So it was a crazy rocket ship journey, learned a lot, made a lot of mistakes along the way, and hopefully have some interesting thoughts on tech and startups for folks in New Zealand and Australia to kind of think about when building a company from Australasia to the US.
Yeah, that's great. And that must have been a pretty wild ride in 4 years. That type of revenue growth certainly must have had a lot going on, a lot of plates to spin all at the same time.
Yeah, it was a crazy journey. I mean, one of the things that's probably encouraging to founders is, I never felt like Pushpay was successful until about 6 months before I finished there. There's a great Elon Musk quote. He says, starting a startup is like staring into the abyss and chewing glass at the same time. And I think that, what separates kind of good founders from really great ones is, building a startup is just about being able to take on a lot of pressure and a lot of pain. And it's why something people don't talk about a lot in the space is just the mental health aspect of being a founder, having raised money, having expectations from investors, employees, from customers, and then having to deliver on that. And so you feel the weight of pressure that you have to deliver. And so for us to do it as a public company added like this other level of pressure, which is why we never felt successful, because every single quarter there was another goal that we had to hit and achieve in order to continue building the company. And so, yeah, I mean, it was a crazy ride, but it was only a crazy ride successfully looking backwards in retrospect, because at the time it didn't feel like we were winning. It felt like we'd climbed another mountain and there was another bigger one to climb the quarter after that.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And no doubt it's really important to celebrate success along the way. With that in mind, and all of the, the stress that comes with being an entrepreneur, and not only the external pressure, but also the internal pressure that, obviously drives you to be successful and to achieve what it is that you want to achieve and make the change that you want in the world. What are a couple of things that you do to help deal with the stress of being an entrepreneur?
Absolutely. I think the first thing that helped me was having a really great co-founder. And I think that it's kind of really underrated having someone who is kind of in the trenches with you every single day, fighting to achieve the same goal. And, Elliot for me was like the absolute perfect person that I could have partnered with, because we had very complementary skills. We were both non-technical. which is insane, to start a startup without a technical co-founder. But we were both non-technical, but we were both equally committed to win. And, we just had this kind of inherent drive to want to go out and grow quickly, build something meaningful, serve customers and provide value. And he had come from a competitive cycling background and had this like intense kind of drive to just, get on a bicycle and ride for 5 or 6 hours a day. And so it's like that kind of background of, taking pain to then bring it into the business world and sales, which is what he was responsible for, really allowed him to deal with the setbacks and the hard knocks that occurred in running a business, because he had this kind of background of doing cycling. And me having done, 18 different companies and all of them failed, the idea of going into something that was intensely hard wasn't new to us because of the backgrounds that we had. So I think someone coming from a really big corporate environment, having a successful VP, C-level title, all of this, you come into a startup, you're in for a shock. It's like a ice bath or something that you're just going to be like, what in the world have I come to? Because the expectations and the pressure that it's going to come on you is not the same as running in a big company where if we launch a product and it doesn't work this quarter, oh well. And that's why you see Apple and to a lesser degree some of these other companies where they just don't have successful founders coming out of them. Like, can you name a company where the founder worked at Apple? Like, not really, right? Because they're not used to the pressure of running an organization and being responsible for all of those different things about whether the business works or not. And so it's different for people who are coming in as first-time founders, maybe from a corporate background, where you just get a complete shock to the system that this is not what I signed up for. I thought it would be just like being a VP at, Pushpay or Aura or something else. Like, it's just, this is different because the pressure and the amount of different stakeholders I've got to keep happy is much more than what I thought.
And so with that in mind, obviously there's always the next quarter to look towards and the greater objective that you're trying to achieve. What are a couple of the ways that you would celebrate success just to make sure that you do take those moments to go, hey, we have come really far and I am really proud of that?
Yeah. Well, I think that when you think about raising money and getting, trying to build a startup, it's like kind of getting on a treadmill. And when people want to raise money from me, what I want to look at is, okay, we're at, 500K of ARR today, and you're looking for $2 million. How far can we go with the money that we're going to raise? And does that get us far enough to raise a Series A? If we're at 500K and we're going to go to 2 million, great. Like, we can raise a Series A based on that. But if your plan is to go 500K to $1 million and spend 2 million to get there, we're not going to be able to raise a Series A because we haven't put the runs on the board. And so what we would do is say, okay, we're at this situation here, and with the funding we're raising, we need to get to this particular milestone. And at that milestone, we can then kind of engage investors to try and raise the next round of funding. And having a really clear roadmap like that aligns the board of directors, the management team, and the frontline employees. And now we have a scoreboard that everyone can see, and we know whether we're winning or not. And so then all we do is we just back that into quarterly numbers and monthly numbers that allow us to track how we're going against the kind of 12, 18, 24-month plan, so that we all can get to the Series A, raise the funding, and kind of keep things going. And so when we would have those quarterly numbers, they'd all be broken down, they'd all be transparent. Every single deal would pop in Slack from the sales bot, and we would have massive celebrations when big deals and the new biggest deal would close, because the whole team could see it and everyone could see how we were tracking against the monthly number, the quarterly number, and our goal to kind of get to the next tier where we can raise the next round of funding. And so I think that kind of scoreboard and mechanism kind of has a real transparency to it and a real ability to align people. And so that's the first one. The second one I'd say is it wasn't until about 4 years in that we realized we were just kind of like grinding people like a meat grinder, because we had this mechanism like, are we winning every month? Are we winning every quarter? And so we were kind of transparent about that and had the scoreboard. But when we hit the monthly target, it was like, great, now the next target is this one plus 10%. And so people felt like they were just being kind of, on a treadmill and never kind of stopping to celebrate the successes that we were having. And so we actually had this thing called the annual awards night, which was like a black tie kind of event. And of course, we were in Seattle. People hate to dress up. So we told them you have to wear a black tie, to come to the Pushpay awards night. And we celebrated individuals who through the last 12 months had either achieved something, who were living out our core values, who served customers, and would literally give them trophies and like little bonuses or ways to say thank you. And it was like people's favorite kind of time of the year because we got to celebrate individuals who had gone above and beyond to help the company. And of course, when you celebrate that, that gets repeated. And so at Leadr now, every single quarter, we have a little segment in our all hands meeting that we call We Stop and Smell the Roses. And we find ways to celebrate people who have gone above and beyond in the previous month or the previous quarter. And so it's not even a year later, it's just literally a quarter to say, hey, we want to recognize this person. And so finding those little ways to celebrate the little wins is like super important, because otherwise you get a year in and you're like, what am I doing this for? I'm putting runs on the board, but it just doesn't feel like we're winning, and no one around me is celebrating because we had 3 great months and then a terrible month. And it's like, we're just in a tough spot at that point.
Well, it's so interesting, especially how you've sort of progressed through experience, the way that you celebrate success. It sounds like what you do really well is create, take a really pragmatic approach and create a lot of visibility across the whole organization on what success actually looks like, and then make it obvious that you're either hitting those numbers or you're not. But then to back that up, also identifying like specific individual contributions and achievements, providing that acknowledgement, which gives people the reinforcement that, hey, I am working really hard, that's seen, and that's why we're continuing on this treadmill, as you said, just to get where we need to go, but stopping along the way to stop and smell the roses, as you said.
It was a little thing. We would have these like trophies, they're like kind of, Oscar trophies or whatever, Golden Globes. Yeah. And so they would have them on their desk when, they would kind of get these things. And there was one sales guy who wasn't Elliot. It was one of the guys on the team. And he had kind of won, the top sales rep for the last 3 years. And so on his desk, he had the top 3 trophies for the last 3 years of kind of ARR added. And he, it was the 4th year, and it was like really close at the end of the year with him and another guy. And so they were like really busting their butts to try and kind of win the trophy. And so it's like, it's just a little thing. It's like a piece of metal, like what? But they were working really hard to try, and he's like, I've got to get the 4th one in a row. And so it's that kind of thing where you create the incentive behind wanting to be recognized for, producing a great result for the company.
I love it. And I think that obviously has worked really well for you, given all of the companies that you've started. And celebrating success and motivating people, I think, is probably one of the most important things to grow any company, as I'm sure you'll agree. Just moving now over to your experience in the US. So you touched on that Pushpay was about $1 million revenue before you moved over to the US. What really motivated you to move to the US?
So I think when, we're Kiwis and we look at running a startup, the number one thing for an investor is the size of the TAM. And probably one of the main reasons that people don't invest in companies is because the TAM is too small. And so if you're just going to build a company to operate in New Zealand, the chances you're going to be successful are pretty much zero, because the TAM is just not big enough. There's, 5 million people, right? Now, if you're selling accounting software, like the TAM is quite large. But if you're selling, something else, what you're going to find very quickly is you've put some runs on the board, you've been successful, but then we have run out of people to sign up. And, there's a company I invested in called First AML. The government changed the law that every, real estate agent, every lawyer, every something else, real estate agents, lawyers, and accountants, they have to AML potential buyers or customers, right? And so it's like we managed to go out and like win the New Zealand market very quickly, but that's maybe it's 10, maybe $20 million maximum of TAM. So at that point you have to go overseas, and they launched in the UK and in Australia and obviously have been growing there. But when we start thinking about, okay, we have to build a large organization if we're going to be able to raise venture capital, because VCs need 10 and 100x outcomes in order to kind of keep the model working. Because if you invest in 10 companies and 7 fail within 4 years, then the 3 that are remaining not only have to recover the 7 that failed, but have to produce a significant enough return for their investors to continue investing in their funds, right? VCs want to make money. So
Sure.
if you don't have a plan to be a 10 or 100x company, you're not a startup. Like, you're a lifestyle business, you're a nice organization, but you're not a startup. Startups, by definition, have to grow quickly and have to become 100 million revenue organization. Like, that's it. And so the question that you have to say is, like, are we looking to build $100 million company or not? Because if you are, the question is, where is that TAM? And the answer is probably not in New Zealand. And so you say, okay, well, where is it? Is it in Australia? Is it in America? Is it in the UK? Like, and once you've kind of figured out that, what you're going to find is, when you take your New Zealand case studies and you bring them to America, no one wants to look at them. Michael Hill Jeweler, who, you have what company? I've never heard of Telecom Spark New Zealand. Like, what is that? They don't care. Hey, this is a listed $2 billion company. Like, that's nothing in America. They don't want to see a case study from a New Zealand company. They want to say, who have you got in America that I can look at, that I can call, that I can talk to? And when you turn up here, they're going to ask you those questions. And if you don't have anyone, you're going to be in trouble. And that's why it's so hard, is because America is so insular and it's such a large market by itself, right? With hundreds of millions of people, that, a large organization in the States is just multiple times bigger. Like, I don't know, Google is how many times bigger than the whole economy of New Zealand, right?
Sure.
The whole entire market cap of New Zealand and Australia or something, probably. So, it's just so big that the prize is so big. That's why venture capital exists in America, because if you invest in a company and they win the American market, it's going to be a massive outcome. And so New Zealand companies have to think global from day one. You cannot start a company and think New Zealand. You have to think about, how do I get to New Zealand, England, Australia, where you have to think about that from the jump. And the question that we finally kind of came around to was, like, if we go to Australia and win, we're still not a big organization, right? Like, forget the fact that, how many churches there are. There's 300,000 churches in America. Like, if we went to Australia and won, it's a 25 million person country. It's tiny. Like, that's 90% smaller than America. So the point is, you have to grow. And once you realize that, you say, where is the market? And you say, well, the market is America, biggest consumer economy in the world. And so for us, added to that is the fact that there was a lot of churches here and people are more religious, that made the opportunity just so big that we were like, we can't go to Australia. It's just a diversion. We have to come to the States from the jump and kind of start to build out the go-to-market and sales in the States from early on.
Yeah, that's great and makes total sense, especially from a VC perspective. Many New Zealand companies take on venture capital and obviously need to deliver those returns. I think one of the things that came to mind for me is the question around, aside from maybe the specific product market fit of Pushpay, but just more generally across businesses, would you strongly recommend choosing the US over the UK and Europe, or other potential opportunities like that as well?
It depends on the size of the prize. And I think, Xero was smart at some point and they looked around and they said, look, we're not going to beat Intuit. Intuit have, so much money and so much resources and they're so entrenched. And fundamentally, why Xero didn't work in the States wasn't just that Intuit was more resourced. It was because the model they pioneered, where the accountant was the channel for the go-to-market, is fundamentally different in America. Americans don't use their CPA as their kind of, trusted advisor like we would in New Zealand, Australia, or the UK. And so what they realize is that the markets of New Zealand, Australia, and the UK have a lot of similarities, whereas the market in the US is fundamentally different. If we win these, we can still be a $30 billion company. That's massive. Like, let's just go there and not compete with Intuit, and that's way easier. Whereas, for us, the business model in the US, where we're able to get some of the processing revenue that doesn't exist in the rest of the world. So, the effort versus reward in Australia was significantly lower, where if we could get US customers and they used us as their processor, the return was significantly higher.
Yeah, sure. That makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of it does come down to the specific business and, what opportunities lie in each of those geographies. I know with First AML, there's specific like regulatory opportunities across Australia and the UK, which would obviously drive a company to move there rather than the US as well. One of the things you've talked about a lot is the size of the prize. And I think that what's really interesting, contrasting against the APAC or ANZ market, is like, let's use your example for $25 to $30 million TAM across Australia. To build a successful company in one of those markets, then really you need to become the market leader. But my experience in the US recently has certainly been that the size of the economy is so enormous, to your example around Google, that there's a lot of money to be made even at $100 million revenue level, where you certainly don't need to even become the market leader in the US. What are your thoughts around moving to the US as a New Zealand company, and then the approach to how much market share do you actually need to get to be super successful?
Yeah. Well, I think just to answer the last question first, it's less about the market share and more about, can you get to 100 million? And, even now the stakes for a US listing is 200 or 300 million of ARR, right? It's just continued to go up over the last few years. And so the question is, can you see, and can the investors see a direct pathway from where you are today to a $200 or $300 million a year revenue business? And how many businesses in New Zealand have ever achieved that? Like, very few, right? You can count them on one hand. But the reason why is because you have to think global from day one, because you have to say, I've got a plan to be 300 million. And that's where I say, like, why bother going after a $20 million prize? Like, you put all the work in, it's just not big enough to even justify raising capital and trying to build all the software. And like, first principles here are really easy. Like, the whole premise of the software business, like from the start, is you write a piece of software once and you sell it multiple times. Like, that's why software businesses are so attractive. And so if you're limiting yourself and say, I can only sell this piece of software 20 times versus in another place where I can sell it 2,000 times, you're already behind the 8 ball from the jump, and capital is not going to flow to those opportunities, which is why it's harder to build large organizations in smaller geographies, because the capital is not going to flow to small kind of smaller TAMs. So, but you can be the 10th biggest player in a particular market, and you can still be a $200 million company in the States, for example, right?
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter that there's competition. The question is, on some variable, are you better than the incumbent? And what that leads to over time is markets fragment. I was talking to a friend the other day about the church space, and when we came along, we were the first to do mobile giving in the States. And it's like, if you think about why can two Kiwis come to America and do mobile giving? Because we're from the future. People in America still write checks and they pay in cash and all that. We turned up and we're like, why are people putting checks and cash in the offering bucket? The future is a cashless world. I hadn't written a check in New Zealand since 2003. So we turned up and we're like, this is broken. The solution is to do this on your phone. So then the question is, can we persuade people to do that? But the point of all that is, now what will happen in the market is, there was Pushpay, but eventually the market fragments into, people serving small, medium, and large churches. And what that means is each one of those is a 200, 300 or more $1 million opportunity. And so if you were starting in that space today, you would say, small, medium, and large churches, which ones do we want to go after? Each one of those is already a $300 million prize. So, no one's servicing, small churches, let's go after that. And then your whole company, your whole entire go-to-market, your whole culture is based on small organizations, and how do I self-service and, support them, tech touches, Stripe, self-onboarding, self-underwriting, the whole thing. Like, you've got to set your whole company up to serve small customers. And then your go-to-market is, I need to talk to Ryan because I've got to fill the top of the funnel and move people through a self-sign-up mechanism. But if I just take the extreme other example, there's 4,000 churches in America that are like, say, 1,500 members or more, which is, they have 2 million or more in revenue. If I'm going after that, this is an enterprise sales motion. I'm hiring people with briefcases to go around on their cell phones and go and visit people in person, because each time I win one of those deals, it's a 30, 40, 50K deal. And so the culture and the go-to-market motion aligns with the customer, and I can only enable that by the size of the TAM. And so what happens is the market fragments into these different things serving people. And so in a really large TAM with, say, 30 billion of total opportunity, there might be 8 of those or 9 of those, and you have to figure out the vector and the variable and the way that you can attack this particular grouping of customers and provide a better service, aligned all the way from your culture to the go-to-market motions, to be able to say, I'm the world's best at signing up really small churches, self-onboarding them, and getting them to use our giving software because it serves those people. And if you're the best at that, then you can go win that particular TAM. But what people don't do is align the whole motion from the size of the customer all the way through to the culture of the organization that we're trying to serve. And having that alignment is so critical in succeeding in New Zealand or anywhere else.
Yeah, that's that's so insightful. One of the things that's super interesting just listening to you, Chris, is the level of thinking that you're at in terms of how big picture you are. One thing I noticed from recently being in the US was how everything's at scale. So if I take like a successful, say, restaurant in Wellington, that's always packed out and it always seems to be full and it's been around for years. That the owner of that business might do pretty well for themselves, and the opportunity though is so much smaller. And when I went to the US, and I noticed how at scale there would just be 10 of those restaurants in different locales around a state or around multiple states. And I think to be successful in a country like the US that has an economy of that size, like I can see how your level of thinking really applies for that as well. Which leads into my next question, is that I think fundamentally, because of our size, New Zealand and Australian companies tend to think on a smaller scale potentially. And so how can a company from New Zealand or Australia move to the US to expand there and balance trying to think at scale, but also focusing on the minutiae of actually building a really great piece of software that's going to work as well?
Absolutely. I think so we were really proud. We had all our engineering in New Zealand, and we're really proud to build software in New Zealand and export it to the world. I think we shouldn't go away from that, because New Zealand engineers and New Zealand, number 8 fencing wire mentality of like, we can just kind of make this happen and build it, and then we can kind of serve the rest of the world, is the kind of mentality that makes New Zealand entrepreneurs really special. But when you come to the States, if I just back up a second, the number one mistake that entrepreneurs make is they think they're further along than they are. And this applies across the board. There's some quote that said, you can't fool other people, but the easiest person to fool is yourself. And, there's this idea of like fake it till you make it in entrepreneurship. And it's a complete and utter lie. In one of his books, Good to Great, Jim Collins has this thing called the Stockdale Paradox. Yeah. And the Stockdale Paradox is, we believe that we will win in the end, but we always face the current difficulties no matter how difficult they are. And it's like truly great entrepreneurs have this unique mix of, we're going to win. Like if you give me long enough in any particular field, I'm going to win, because I'll read the books, I'll talk to the people, I'll get on the plane, I'll raise the money, like I'm going to win. And so you need that kind of like quiet confidence that almost, as Kiwis, we don't like to do that and kind of say, like, you give me the ball, I'm going to run down the field and score the touchdown, score the try, because like I back myself to be able to do it. But then you've got to mix with that what New Zealanders have, this incredible humility of facing the difficulties and being very aware of how difficult things are. And it's in the mix of these two things where real magic happens. And so what happens when you come to the States is you very quickly realize that we're not in New Zealand anymore. People don't know what meat pies are, and they don't know what pineapple lumps and LMP is. They're like, howdy, partner, I've got my cowboy hat on. You're in my town now. Like, you've got to talk like I talk, and you've got to act like I act. And so what we have to do is deconstruct everything we've ever learned about how to be a Kiwi and understand their culture from a first principles basis. And if you just turn up and you say, well, yeah, I've got all these things I've done and look how great I am, that matters very little to people in the States, because they just think a little differently. And so when we turned up here, we were shocked to find that all of the customers we had in New Zealand didn't matter for anything. People are just like, show me how you're going to help me. Does this work or not? Like, if it works, I'm going to buy it. If it doesn't work, I'm not going to buy it. And combined with that, in the early days, you are not targeting 100% of the market. We very early were very clear that we want churches that are between 500 and kind of 2,000 in size, because if you're bigger than that, we don't have the infrastructure and support, and we're actually going to burn those large customers because we don't have the software to serve them. So we're very clear, this is who we want to go after. At Leadr, when we started, our ICP was churches with 10 to 30 staff who were churches who were early adopters, right? Like, it's like 500 organizations. So, hey, there's 500, okay? But here's the good news. We only have to get 50 to be like, get to the next level of where we're going. And then we have to get to 100 to get to the next level of where we're going. And the good news is the software is specifically valuable and solves a problem for these people. And so what happens is we're like entrepreneurs, like, oh, I've got to get a big TAM. I've got to sign up the biggest. Like, if you talk to GE, they won't call you back for 2 years. So you have to be more humble than that and say, I'm going to go and find someone who can make a buying decision in 30 days. And I'm going to make 100 phone calls and 99 people will say no. And I know it from the jump. And I'm happy to chew the glass and look into the abyss, because that's what starting a startup is. And I'm going to take 99 hits in the face to get one deal. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do another 100 phone calls. And this time, because I have one case study that I crushed, because I overserved that customer. I went on a plane. I went out there to meet them. It was inconvenient. I had to leave my kids behind. It sucks. But I went out there and I made that customer successful. Because of that, I've earned the right to now go and find 3 more. And when I find 3, I make 100 phone calls. I get rejected 97 times this time. But I get 3 customers and now I have 4. Then I make 100 phone calls and I get rejected 93 times because my pitch is getting better, my product's getting better, I'm adding momentum to what I'm doing, and it sucks. It's painful. But the good news is I look up in a year and I've got 31 customers. And you're like, well, that's not venture capital, backable. And the answer is it's not, but it will be, because I only have to get it, like, if I keep improving at this rate, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look up another year from now and I have 85, and all of a sudden I can show someone I've got traction. I understand the market. I've overserved those 85 customers. They love us. If anyone calls them randomly, they're going to say great things about us. And so it starts small, but the point is, like, it's exponential. And so it's not 85 to 170 the next year. It's like, how do I go 85 to 300? Then how do I go 300 to 1200? And so all of a sudden, all that hard work in 2 years and 3 years and 4 years, I'm already into it. And people will say, well, it takes that long. What you don't realize is I spent 4 years to get to $1 million of revenue at Pushpay. 4 years. And then in the next 4 years, we went 1 to 100, right? Because we understood our market. We weren't sitting around doing nothing for 4 years. We were like actively understanding the buyer. Like, who is the buyer? If I talk to the finance person, they're going to shoot us down and say no. So how do I get the deal done without even having them in the deal? And it's that kind of thing of like, okay, who's the buyer? And so, it's just like Porter's 5, parts of marketing. It's the pitch, getting your pitch right, getting your pricing right, getting your packaging right, and getting the product. Like, what is it that we're actually delivering through, a SaaS mechanism to get that right? And so how do we kind of get these pieces lined up? And what people don't realize is you change one, you change all of them. Hey, I'm going to increase the price. Okay, well, I just went from 10 grand to 20 grand per deal. Okay, but now my pitch isn't good enough because my pitch worked for 10K sales. Actually, now I've got to sell more enterprise. I've got to sell to bigger organizations. The questions they ask and the objections are different, and the integrations we need are different. Oh, now I've got to integrate with these different features and products and stuff. And so it's like, oh, snap. And so what happens is you're changing one of these 4 or 5 variables constantly for a year or 2 until you find it. And then to your point about restaurants, when I can sign up 100 customers in some period of 6 months, 9 months, I can sign up 300. And that's the best part of startups. That's the encouraging part. I don't look at the 97 times people said no. I look at the 3 times they said yes. And I'm like, if 3 people will say yes, 30 will say yes. And I'm not looking at the size of the prize is like billions of dollars, but I don't have to worry about that. I just have to worry about going from 3 that I have to get to 30. And that's it. Like I just tactically adding that little bit, and all of a sudden you look up and one day you're like, we have 10,000 customers and 100 million of revenue. Like, how did this happen? And it was just because every single little step was that each step was achievable by itself, but each one incrementally was like exponential when you look at the impact overall of the impact on the business. And so that's kind of the part when you come to the States is like, you're gonna talk to 100 people and get 99 no's. And most people won't go through the discomfort to do it because it's like, it's easier just to go back to New Zealand and build a $20 billion company. Because I know how to operate there, and I know Marmite and chip sandwiches, and I know L&P. But like when I come here, everything is different, and I'm in a different world, and it's uncomfortable. And ultimately, that's what running a startup is just being okay with change and discomfort until you eventually win the game.
Yeah, wow, that's great advice, Chris. I think it's so interesting to see to think about how daunting multi-billion-dollar TAM can be, but when you break it down into those small pieces, it's actually like, as you said, coming back to your quarterly approach and your business planning and creating visibility. It's just about getting one more run on the board, and then all of a sudden you've won the game, right? That's really interesting. Just one of the things I wanted to touch on, you've talked about sales quite a lot, and I think New Zealanders and Australians, we're almost anti-salespeople to some extent. And I've certainly heard and understand that in the US, there's a lot more vigor that's attached to sales, and probably a lot more, to me, and I may be wrong, but it sounds like there's a lot more promising going on, a lot more like, we're going to do this, and really overselling what you're doing, assuming that you can deliver on what you are saying. What's like one or two pieces of advice you'd give to a Kiwi just going to their first US deal?
Well, let me just hit on the overselling, because I think it's really interesting. So one of the questions you got to say is like, why is this company that's $5 or $10 million of revenue trusting us with XYZ functionality? Okay. And so the only reason that they would choose to partner with a startup is that either A, there's no one else in the whole world who can do what you're doing. It's unlikely. But number two is because they want a long-term partnership with you and your company. And so when you talk to someone and you say, hey, we're here, this is where we're at today, and this is where we're going to be in the future, there's a fine line between over-promising and lying and saying, actually, the reason that you're partnering with us is not just where we're at today, but where we're going to be in 3, 6, and 9 months, and then 3 years. And so the reason that we won a lot of deals was because I could show them and say, we have 110 engineers in New Zealand who are improving our product every single day, and we're here today, and we have 70% of what you want. But I can tell you on your list of other functionality, those 3 things are going to be here in the next 12 months, and those 3 things will be here 12 months after that. And they said, well, I believe you. And so it's a fine line, but what I want to say is like, it's actually an advantage to an organization to say, I remember the single largest deal we ever did in Pushpay history. I flew out to meet with the customer because I knew that we were going to potentially mislead them based on what we did versus what we could do. And I said, I want to sit with them and I want to step them through the whole product, every single screen, so that there's no expectation gap between what we actually have and what they think they're getting. And so we went through all of this, and I just candidly said to them, here's a whiteboard. I want you to write 12 things that you think, are missing in our product that you would like to have. And they listed them all out, and I took a picture of it. And then there's a thing in product management called Moscow: must have, should have, could have, and would have. And I said, if you could choose 3 of these things, put a must have next to it. And if you could choose 3 of these things, put a could have and what it's on. It's like, there's the 12, right? 4 in each of the different buckets. Well, I look back 18 months later, and we had shipped 9 of the 12 things that were on that list to that customer. And so don't fear don't lie to customers, but don't fear the fact of telling them, like, this is where we're at, because people are coming on board because they believe in the future of where you're going, and they're buying the vision and buying into you as much as the product itself. So you can't fear that. And, I think it's a really nuanced point to make about engaging with large customers, but you don't have to worry about like, well, I don't have all these things, right? When I make 100 phone calls and 99 people say no, a bunch of them are like, you don't have these things, but when you do, call me back. And you're like, great, I just got to know. Like, okay, great. And so the point is like, that's okay. You don't lie to them. You just tell them like, this is what we do. And for some people in the market, the pain that you solve in the way that you solve it right now is enough for them to move forwards in a buying process. And it's just literally, but most people won't make the 100 cold calls though. So you'll never find out. And what happens is all of a sudden my product roadmap is now sketched out because customers are telling me, hey, if you had these features, I would buy. I'm like, great. Now I know exactly what to build. It's ordered. And this is why I like B2B, because it's in some ways a lot cleaner because you know exactly what the functionality you have to build is over time. So I apologize. I know that wasn't the question, but I think it's really important to say, like, don't despair if you feel like you have a very incomplete product. It's just about finding the people and finding the similar. If you have 5 customers, what's the similarity that all 5 of them have that you can find 5 more? Like, you can do that. You can do that. You absolutely, everyone in the whole world can do that. You can't tell me there's not 5 more customers in New Zealand, Australia, or America who have the same characteristics as the 5 that you already have. So, that's the way to think about it, is like, don't worry about the 100 million if you're in a big TAM, just focus on the next 5, and then that kind of compounds. So that's the overselling part. With regards to turning up in the States, the first thing that we did was Elliot and I were constantly coming to and from the States before we had visas to be here, to visit legally on, kind of visitor visas and so on. And so because we were learning a lot and we were shaping our product before it was time to get proper visas and move here. So there was that. Second thing is you have to work American hours. It sucks, but Elliot had 3 sales reps and they would come to the Pushpay office at 4 o'clock in the morning. Because if you think you can do customer service half of the time that America's awake, you're not going to be able to win those accounts. It's like the basic things. Like, how do we get 4 people to turn up to our office at 4 o'clock in the morning? Well, I don't know, but they did. But the point is that you have to be available on American hours. And, back then, we were on Skype on laptops. We didn't have headphones and stuff. And like, I came back with a white pages and gave it to these guys, and they tore, you get A to F, tear it out of the pages and give it to them. And you get F to M and you rip it out and you get those. And they just started calling, right? Wow. And it's like, and they were basically, on commission plus not much money, and it was like, they were just like, hey, if you make 100 calls, you will do this and you'll close this many and you'll make this much money. And I was like, great. And so they'd turn up at 4 in the morning and work their 8-hour shift or whatever. And they would call US hours. And, people would be like, hey, where's your headquarters? Yeah. We actually did have a headquarters in Orange County. So like, yeah, we're based in Orange County. And like, how's the weather there today? Yeah, that's Orange County. It's 80 and sunny. I mean, it's very nice over here. And so it's kind of that kind of like, hey, we are an American company. We talk funny, but we're an American company. And kind of having that, I'm from New Zealand. I talk funny. We have engineers in New Zealand. We have investors in New Zealand. But like, we are an American company is very important to kind of establish from the jump. And then if people are calling, emailing, whatever, getting support, being able to connect with people. And then the other thing alongside of, that future promising stuff we talked about, people want to meet the CEO of the company. They want to meet a founder. And so when you turn up, no matter how small you are, like, you don't need to pretend like you're 10,000, but like pretend like you're 1,000 or 500 or something. Like, pretend like you know what you're doing. And people are like, oh, you're the founder. You started this thing. Like, even in America, that is a massive deal that you took a risk, that you stepped out of a well-paying job to start something. And there's this entrepreneurship culture here that people respect that you've built a product. Like, so you turn up and you say, hey, I'm the CEO, I'm the founder of this thing. And people love meeting you. They want to hear your story. Like, they're very relational. And so like, obviously, yes, you got to sell, but like, use those attributes to your benefit and use Elliot and I, we would use our accent to our benefit. Just like, sorry, we talk funny, like New Zealand, we're the better part of Australia or whatever. And just kind of, people love that. They love that it's a bit different. They love that you're not necessarily trying to pretend to be fully American and wearing a cowboy hat when you're not necessarily that. And it's very relational. And to your point, Americans don't mind sales if you solve problems for them, right? And the absolute, I'll say this last thing, the absolute best salespeople never feel like they're selling. They're just engaging with you, solving a problem for you, connecting you. helping you with different things, introducing you to different people. Hey, by the way, I've got this thing. Do you want to buy it? Like, sure, you've helped me out all this other times. Like, why would I not do that? And so it's not something, when you come to America, don't fear sales. It doesn't mean it's easy, but like, don't fear engaging with people and asking for the deal, because that's what's you're gonna get the learnings. And if they say no, just be like, hey, I'm not gonna ask, we're not gonna sell you anything, but just, would you mind telling me why? Like, what one thing could I have done different that would have helped us, win the sale next time? If there was a feature that we needed to have. And so all of a sudden, all those no's are not no's, they're learnings that we then take and apply to the product and the pitch and the packaging and everything else like that.
That's awesome. I love that, both in the example around like what you actually offer in your product, and also how you come across, right? Coming across like a bigger company than you are really just relates back to that backing yourself of like, well, our vision is to be this, and that's how I'm going to position us today, because I 100% have a belief that that's where we're going to go, and I think that you're going to believe it too. But what I love the most is that you've found a way to authentically still be yourself with your Kiwi values, and while selling in a different culture, which is obviously a hard sort of balance to find as well.
Yeah, and I think people have a real affinity towards New Zealand. I think, being able to lean into that and say, hey, Lord of the Rings and whatever, like people have some perspective, they have an understanding of New Zealand. And I think that it's like a great conversation starter. In the early days, a lot of our best reps were from New Zealand or had a New Zealand accent, but they were able to use that and leverage that to start a conversation, because it's just a great way to do it, and so nice. I think don't see it as a negative, see it as a net positive.
Yeah, I love that. Chris, do you have 2 or 3 more minutes, or do you
absolutely.
Okay, cool. Just going to probably go through 2 sort of more quick fire questions as well. Just wait 1 sec. So for a Kiwi or Aussie company looking to move to the US, just quick fire, like what are the main locations that come to mind right away? You're based in Dallas, as I understand it. I'm sure that you're a fan of Dallas. Tell me the best places for a tech company to move in New Zealand from to.
Yeah, look, real quick. The best founders are first principles thinkers. So of course, everyone's like, go to the Bay Area, which is great. If you're selling to customers in the Bay Area, go to the Bay Area. So long story short, go to where your customers are. We went to Seattle because it was a good mix of, culture for us, access, time zone wise to New Zealand. But as we started building Leadr, we went to where we felt like we could find great employees at a reasonable price, because that's a really important factor. So, current startup hubs in the States, obviously LA, there's, more Silicon Beach kind of stuff going on there now. The Bay Area, of course, and we think of the Bay Area as the Bay Area, but really there's 4 or 5 different parts of that. Palo Alto, Silicon Valley, San Francisco, like they actually have different attributes. Miami is obviously a massive up and coming kind of hub. But yeah, I would think about, if you're going to be coming backwards and forwards, how do you get a direct flight to wherever you're going as quickly as possible? And then just, is the price insane? Because, hiring engineers or hiring people in the Bay Area is going to cost 2 or sometimes 3 times more than the rest of the country. And so almost all large SaaS companies now have their support offices in Utah or in somewhere else, Phoenix, that, is able to support 100 people at a significantly cheaper cost.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And how would you advise integrating yourself into the tech scene in one of those places? Let's say Miami, it's up and coming. What would be like your go-to just to start making connections in that area?
Yeah, I mean, people in the tech space love helping each other. So I would just literally reach out to a handful of founders and ask for help. Hey, can I meet with you? You look like you've done X. I'd love to learn from X. And again, it's just don't be backwards about coming forwards and asking, because I think tech entrepreneurs, tech founders is a very small community. We all have been through the ringer, and so I think people love helping other people. And so don't necessarily ask for that person to make a connection or to give you investment or whatever, but just, hey, can we meet? I'd love to hear your feedback. And just when it comes to pitching a startup, sometimes other founders and VCs, it's worth taking meetings to kind of get feedback, to get on their radar, make connections and so on, because they can even tell you like, hey, did you know about company A, B, C, D, and E that are doing something in a similar space? And if you don't know the space that you're operating in, it's impossible to answer like, how are you different than X? So just that kind of learning the landscape is really important.
Yeah, nice, great answer. And how would you recommend moving to the US? Obviously, you can go there by yourself. You could bring your family. You could just do trips back and forth. I also know a few businesses doing conference runs. There's hiring boots on the ground right away. What would your recommended approach be based on your experience?
Yeah, if you look at your TAM and you say, well, we have to be in the States for a to achieve the $100-300 million TAM that we're talking about, then you have to move here. Like, there's no doubt about it. And New Zealand founders have done so with varying degrees of success. But the one thing I'd say is, first of all, start on your visa early. 2 years before you plan to get one, you need to do a call with an immigration consultant and have them tell you what the criteria are for you to be able to get a visa of some description. Because absent that, you can come here for 90 days, but you have to go back again. And so start on the process like the second that you think that you're going to be moving there. And then, having customers in New Zealand for immigration is actually a massive positive. And, the more bigger name customers you have, the easier it is, to show we have a legitimate business. We're a startup, but we're a legitimate business because we serve these really big names that are, X, Y, and Z. And so having those on your company and your client roster is like super important. And so start on that as soon as you possibly can. And then, just like figure out where are your customers and where do you want to base the company, and trying to do a few trips, to and from the States to kind of understand the opportunity there more.
Yeah. Nice. Hey, this has been great, Chris, and I'll just finish up with one question back to you. Is there anything that I haven't asked today that you really wanted to talk about?
Yeah, so just shameless plug. Matt and I put together a book called Management is Dead, and it's not necessarily about startups, but it's just about managing people. I should say about leading people and making sure that you are building a culture of self-improvement, self-development inside of your organization. Because one of the things that was completely unique about Pushpay was in all of the roles that we built executives, other than finance and engineering, they had never done that role before they came to Pushpay. And so we hired for culture, but we promoted people into those roles who didn't necessarily have the competence, but they were culture fits, they worked hard, they learned the space. And so, the president of the company worked at UPS before, the guy running the credit card processing was a business analyst. And so, that's part of our kind of ethos as New Zealanders is like, Americans love resumes and universities. And I went to Harvard and I went to this place. Like, people tell me I went to SMU and I'm like, I don't know what that is. Like, it's some university. I don't know, is that good or bad? So one of the benefits we have coming to the States is we just look for people that are like, hungry, hardworking, want to learn and grow. And so how do you build a culture to attract those people and retain them, and then ultimately promote them through the organization? And there's a whole bunch of, Pushpay stories in there too, to help illustrate the point, about what that means to do in practice.
Love it. Where can we find Management is Dead? Is it online or?
It's on Amazon and all the places you find books.
Awesome. Hey, I'll be looking out for that one. Hey, thanks, Chris. We'll finish up the interview now.